Hi, Eric here, and I'm pleased to introduce to you a new Psych Sessions feature, the Mentor Series. The interviews featured in this series are with current academics and professionals in the field and their mentors, typically from their master's or doctoral program or postdoctoral studies. We call this an occasional series, meaning that we will release new episodes as we have them. There will not be a weekly or bi-weekly release, nor will we batch episodes and release them as seasons. Our focus will be on mentoring relationships that develop beyond the bachelor's degree. This inaugural episode features an interview I conducted in November 2020 with April Masarik and Rand Conger. April is my colleague at Boise State University and was a guest on Psych Sessions for episode number 77. And she attended graduate school at the University of California, Davis, where Rand Conger served as her mentor. I've heard snippets about Rand over the years, and that experience combined with April's training and preparation since her re-arrival at Boise State, and you'll need to listen to the episode and episode 77 to understand that reference, are in part the inspiration for this mentor series. Please enjoy.
Hi, April.
Hi, Rand.
How's it going out there?
Oh, it's going.
What are you going to say in front of your boss?
I know, right? Thankfully, he allows us to be transparent and pretty honest with how things are going. I do filter myself a little bit, but professionalism and all of that. But yeah, teaching and doing research in a pandemic is definitely different than doing all that stuff outside of a pandemic.
I believe you. I'm so glad I'm not stuck with that chore right now.
I bet.
Yeah.
With that, I want to go ahead and get started because I want to know what it was like for the old boss. So I don't ever think of myself as the boss, but technically I know that's true. So I want to thank you both for being with me today. And this is a special Psych Sessions episode about mentoring. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk to folks, faculty members currently now, and have them talk with their mentors, because we all know that mentoring is an important part of what we do. And I think a lot of attention gets paid to undergraduate mentoring, and that's all well and good, but that's really not the focus of actually the series that I'm hoping to put together. I want to talk about the mentoring of graduate students and the mentoring of postdocs. And I've spoken with April so many times, Rand, over the past 5 or 6 years. And there's a couple things. First off, she's come back to us at Boise State as an amazing scholar, an amazing faculty member. So really, sincerely, no joking, no kidding, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. April's great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the understatement of the decade. But secondly, every time we'd get together, or maybe every other time, I would ask her, how did that happen? And how everybody that we hire goes to graduate school and they have a mentor, and we don't have a department. I really probably shouldn't say this. We don't have a department of 12 Aprils. We don't. And I would probe her about it, and she would tell me a little bit about it. And I'm hoping to get the two of you to talk about it today. So that's really one of the things that kind of prompted me to want to get a chance to talk to you, and especially you and April together. So thank you.
Terrific. I look forward to that.
Maybe if you could start off and talk a little bit about your academic career and maybe give the timeline for yourself and especially your timeline at UC Davis. And then April, I'm going to ask you to give your graduate school timeline and how it fits in when Rand was there.
I've had a strange academic career. I actually got my PhD in sociology and found myself wandering over into doing more and more research that fit best with developmental psychology. So most of my publications have actually been in developmental journals, developmental or family journals. And I started off my career in a sociology department at the University of Georgia with a courtesy appointment in a human development program at Georgia. And then went, strangely enough, as an assistant professor. They hired me as a department chair at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. To this day, I don't know why. It was a small family and child department at the University of Illinois, and they had been looking for a department chair. They didn't like the people they interviewed, and somehow somebody gave them my name, very strangely. And I ended up going to Illinois, and then I thought I was going to be an administrator, so I went to Iowa State University as an associate dean, came to my senses, and then the last leg of my career was a faculty member again at UC Davis, and I was there for 17 years.
17 years. And can you give the rough time span at UC Davis from when to when?
From 2001 until I think I retired. And when did I retire? It seems, I feel like I must have retired in 2015, but that seems like too long ago. But sometime in the last 5 years,
Gotcha.
I retired. Yeah.
Okay.
I can confirm that it was 2015 because I was your very last student. I was your
Is
last
that right?
postdoc. Yep.
Oh, okay. 2015 then. Some people claim I retired in 2012, but I continued to get paid for it. So that's really a good way to end your academic career.
Then April, how about your timeline with RAND?
I joined the Masters of Child Development program at UC Davis in 2008 and met Rand earlier in the year during a recruitment event at UC Davis. So it was really great. They actually paid for applicants who were accepted into the program to come to UC Davis and meet the faculty and the current students and tour all of the labs and the classrooms to determine whether we wanted to go there or not. So I met Rand at Ann Master George's house.
That's right.
And we sat in a room and talked about romantic relationships, and because that was my interest going into graduate school, is I really wanted to understand how we develop our romantic relationships and how our families of origin can impact the ways in which we choose partners and then sustain our romantic partnerships over time, and the questions of what makes a healthy and happy couple, what predicts longevity and commitment in a relationship. Well, all of these things were also in Rand's wheelhouse, and him and his wife and collaborator, Kathy Conger, had a wealth of data on multiple generations of family members. So we started talking about that project, and I got really excited to potentially work with Rand, and Rand seemed interested in working with me, even though I was just a master's student and he didn't really know much about me other than my interests, but he seemed willing to give me a shot.
So April, you already had your master's degree or you were working on it? What was your status at that time?
I just had my bachelor's degree in psychology from Boise State, and so it was me going into a master's program.
At UC Davis.
At UC Davis.
And Rand, you were working with not only doctoral students, but master students in your lab?
I don't know if April actually knows this. I did not want to take April as a student. I didn't want a master's student. And she talked me into it. And then because I was afraid that we would be misaligned, in other words, she was a master's student, and a lot of master students go off and become counselors and things like that. And I'm just not the best person to train a counselor. But then April turned out to be one of the most driven people on the face of the earth. And she powered through her master's program and went into the PhD program. But I was not looking for a master's student at that time.
I do remember you saying that, Rand, during our initial conversation, but I think I ignored it.
So and by the way, if I go to the none of my business department, you can both just signal or something or just ignore it. But so Rand, why did you take the risk then?
Just because she really seemed to want to work in that area. And it was an important area in our program of research. And I thought she really wants to do some work in that area. She seems committed to pursuing that agenda. And I thought that's okay. I'll just go with it. And if it doesn't work out, a lot of things in life don't work out.
How many other did you normally take one master's student a year and take a risk? Or was this a rare event for you? Or was this a common event for you?
It was pretty rare event. I was pretty against it. My experience in the past had not been good in terms of taking master's students. At least we were running a pretty high-powered program of research with a lot of extramural support. And we just weren't set up to bring people in to train them to become public service administrators or to become counselors and things like that. We weren't well equipped to do that. So I thought I just thought it would be an error. And I'd had previous master's students who were unsure. They were entering the master's program. They weren't sure if they wanted to go on to the PhD program. And it hadn't always worked out as well as it should. But April's pretty persistent. And so I said, okay, we'll give it a try.
April, where does that come from? And let me ask you this: were you having that conversation with other UC Davis faculty?
Yes, first of all, I just want to say to Rand, thank you for believing in me and for noticing the commitment and passion that I had at the time, because in retrospect now I understand, wow, that was probably a very big risk for you and for the research team. So thank you so much. And I was speaking with a couple other faculty at UC Davis, Kathy Conger, his wife and collaborator. She was very much interested and involved in sibling relationships. And in general, I'm interested in close relationships, primarily romantic ones, but I thought I could maybe fit in with Kathy in her lab, since she also studied sibling relationships, which are close relationships. And then I was speaking with another faculty member, Adrian Nishina, who studied peer relationships. Rand, though, when I just remember meeting with him and talking about how excited I was about romantic partnerships, and he started talking about how much data he had on the topic. And I think there was just a connection there with the research interest and fit.
Yeah, this strikes me as very unusual in a really good and curious way. You're an undergraduate, you're coming in with wanting to start a master's degree, and you want to geek out over data. And you're sitting in someone's home and you're talking to this world-class faculty member and you're having this conversation, and he decides to take a flyer on you.
Yeah.
Where does that happen other than in a Netflix special? Okay.
Heather, she was just very enthusiastic about what she wanted to do. And so if she had not been, I don't think I ever would have said yes. But she seemed very enthusiastic, very committed to what it is that she wanted to do. And I thought we need somebody who's working in that area. And so let's give it a try. And of course it's worked out wonderfully well for me and for you folks at Boise State.
Oh, absolutely. Rand, would you mind talking a little bit about the interdisciplinary nature of work that you did in your lab? April has shared it with me, but I think it'd be great for the listeners to hear about, because it wasn't a lab full of sociologists trained like yourself.
No, we had quite a cross section of people in the lab. Now, it did bend in the direction of psychology for sure. People in psychology, human development, and then with Kathy, of course, sociology. That she's a true sociologist. And then we had people from statistics. And that was extremely important, to have people who actually knew what they were doing with the numbers beyond just passing acquaintance. The thing that we lacked, although it came in more a little bit later, if I had to fault my career and what we did not pay enough attention to biology over the years. And I just wasn't prepared to do another postdoc myself to really learn about the biological bases of behavior. And so as I went out the door, all I could conclude was that's what was missing more than anything, was a really good biological base in our research work.
But you put together a pretty sophisticated group of people from what April's described to me. And didn't you have like weekly meetings or biweekly meetings, right, April?
We did. I can't remember how often they were. Was it a couple times a month, April, or?
Yeah, I was actually in charge of setting up those meetings.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes they were every week, and sometimes we moved to every other week. And in those meetings, individuals took turns discussing their research and their progress, and it was like a family, just as the research group was named. It's the Family Research Group.
It really was a pretty wonderful lab with lots of different people with lots of different interests pursuing issues like romantic relationships or parent-child relationships from different theoretical and different disciplinary perspectives. It was a really terrific situation. We replicated what we had created when I was at Iowa State, where we had an even larger lab actually, with more grants from different researchers. Interestingly enough, this will go way back in time. I don't know, Eric, if you're familiar with a fellow named Jerry Patterson in Oregon.
I know of the name very vaguely.
He's passed on now, but Jerry started back in the 1950s at the University of Oregon, and then eventually left the university and developed his own research center, which I think continues today, even though he's gone now. But he was my mentor. I spent some time with him at his research laboratory in Eugene, Oregon. I went out there quite a number of times, actually, and our Iowa Center was built on what Jerry was trying to do. And then we tried to replicate that at the University of California.
The thing that impressed me when April would describe your lab, Rand, was that you've got all this multi and interdisciplinary expertise working together on these really big, important issues. And I just can't imagine all those, I'm going to try to say this gently, all those academic egos being chucked at the door. You would think that we all think that our discipline is the greatest discipline on the face in the history of the planet. And somehow, again, you and your team were able to make it work.
We were very fortunate. The people I think who were involved in the lab were mostly interested in the issues that the lab was addressing. Now, and I think they all knew that if we did a good job, the recognition and advancement and all that takes care of itself. If you do a good job, if you do work that people read and find helpful in the discipline, you'll do just fine. And I think most of the people in our lab looked at the world that way.
In the midst of all that, how would you have time to mentor graduate students like April? I mean, April has described to me that she had amazing experiences and got to know you on a personal and professional level. And if you're doing all the things that I've heard you describe that you're doing, you gotta be tired because you haven't slept yet.
It's a busy life for sure. No, I have a good friend, a fellow named Phil Shaver, who was chair of the psychology department at UC Davis and is very well known in his area. He also studied romantic relationships. And he retired a few years ago as well. And every now and then he'll say to me, he doesn't understand why it was that for so many years, he worked 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that was the kind of life we led. Now, I never worked that hard, but I worked pretty hard. And we did have some long days. And I never did pay much attention to whether it was the weekend or a weekday. And early in my career, holidays were for getting papers out, grants written, and things like that. So it is a very centered kind of life where you've got a set of priorities and they become what pushes you and keeps you on a particular path.
So April, are you attempting to replicate that model?
I learned a lot just through direct training from Rand in terms of what it takes to get, papers out and models ran and research disseminated. And I also did a lot of observation. I noticed that he did work a lot. He's a very hard worker. He eats, sleeps, breathes research, and would come into the lab excited about a new idea. Or if we had been running these models, these longitudinal models for weeks and we were getting stuck, he'd come into the room and his face is all, lit up. I have an idea. Let's redo the whole thing. And so he really did live through the research, and the research lived in him, and it looked like a good life. even though I knew it came at a cost, and that is essentially that's what you do all the time, every day during the week. But it didn't look, it looked fun to me. However, I must say too, though, that I learned over time that I needed to figure out a way to balance myself, because it's not sustainable, at least for me. And maybe Rand is a robot or a
I'm not a
Superman.
robot. I just checked a thing that said I am not a robot.
I mean, Rand is incredible. And so I would be constantly trying to compare myself to him, or I admired him so much and still do to this day, but always comparing, okay, this is what his life looks like. He's got 1,000 publications, he's written books, he gets these multi-million dollar grants. I would love to be that, but is that for me? Is that kind of life for me? Will it be sustainable for me? Will it bring me a sense of wholeness to my humanness? So I had to figure it out along the way.
And if I could just say a couple things there. So first off, you're thinking about him at UC Davis at an R1 institution where you're not at an R1 institution and you don't have R1 levels of support. So we have to be fair there. And you're not comparing yourself to him in year 5 or 6 in his career. If you could turn the clock back and see him in year 5, that would be the fair comparison of where you are now and where he was then. It's kind of like my children who are 29 and 25 see the house that I live in now and they go, I want to live in that house. You work a job for 30 years and then you will be able to live in the kind of house that I live in. But they're in year 4 or year 1 of a job. And you have to calibrate your comparisons, I think.
And yeah, and Rand, you've actually taught and instructed me to do that, because I think as a competitive person and someone in academia, it's natural to compare, but sometimes it's like comparing apples to oranges. Like, I shouldn't be comparing my grad school April to Rand's full career status. So I remember him telling me one time, after there was a lot of red ink on one of my papers that he edited, and Rand just has this way of creating a sentence that's not only succinct, but gets all of the message in there. And I just envied that, because it took me forever to create a sentence and I thought it was good, but it ended up being just bullcrap. But then I could just see him writing a new sentence that was much better. And I thought, and I even said out loud a couple of times, I wish I could just write like you. And he said, you will eventually, many years from now, because it takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of repetition. It doesn't just come naturally. So I had to constantly remind myself of that. And now when I'm mentoring students and I'm ripping up their work and tearing apart sentences and slashing words to make things more succinct, they say the same to me. And I say the exact same thing that Rand told me. Just you practice. Years from now, you'll get better. And I always think of Rand and smile.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get so I could write anything that was worth reading. So it does take a lot of practice. Oh, by the way, Eric, let me just comment a little bit.
Please.
I think people have to decide how they want to structure their lives. I think April is absolutely right. For a lot of people, trying to live the kind of life that I led would just be crazy, because you do have a very singular focus and you take a lot of things out of your life that for many people, they really need to be in there. And I hung out with people who had that same kind of singular focus. And the other, I think, really important point you made was, you cannot do the kinds of things that I did or some of the people do at UC Davis without the kinds of supports that we had. We got research money, we got time, we got all kinds of support that most institutions simply don't have. And people should not drive themselves crazy trying to do things without adequate resources to do them.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. In fact, April and I were part of a faculty meeting today where we're trying to think about essentially workload relief during a pandemic. Faculty members all over the world are in the middle of this grand pivot, if you will, of having to adapt. And some are increasing their teaching because they're learning how to teach online. Some are now providing in-home daycare or in-home instruction for their children. Others are worried about sick parents who may be contracting COVID. And so now we're in the middle of this, taking on new and more responsibilities, as well as wanting to be teachers and researchers and provide service to the discipline in the university. It's even more important now more than ever, is what I'm trying to say, to know our limitations. And we still need people to write grants. We still need people to be productive scholars. We still need to, now more than ever, we need to understand the variables that drive romantic relationships and those causative predictors of stress in families. We sure need that. We sure need that information as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there'll be a variety of people in a variety of situations who will contribute to greater understanding in those areas.
So I want to drill down and focus a little bit about the mentoring relationship. So the mentor-mentee between the two of you, and to the extent that you want to share and recollect certain things. I talked to a lot of people over a long career. I just think from what I've heard from April, that this was really special. She came out with a certain skill set, and I'm sorry to say this in front of you, April, but a part of me is not sorry to say it in front of you. You came to us with a really unique sense of self, and you have a very important kindness and appreciation and collegiality that is not typical of someone as an assistant professor who might arrive in their late 20s, early 30s. I'm just going to say that. So Rand, again, I'm going to say it again. Thank you, sir. Thank you, April. What was it that you did? And April, how did you know to take advantage of it? How did you know to leverage it? And Rand, what was the secret sauce? What was the thing that you did? Or was it that you just allowed her to see the whole process and you pulled back the curtain? You did something, sir. You share the parts that you're willing to share, and you can keep the secret recipe or ingredient to yourself, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't think there's a big secret to it. A lot of it was the environment in which April received her graduate training. She grew up academically in an interdisciplinary setting where lots of people were doing lots of different kinds of work, offering different kinds of opinions, attacking problems from many different perspectives. And she grew up in a setting where there was colleagueship, where people collaborated, cooperated, only criticized each other behind their back. No, I don't know. No, actually, we criticized each other quite a bit in our meetings, but I think she just learned a give and take in that situation. Now, if I'd been a very different there are a lot of sociologists, for example, who will bring in a graduate student, and that graduate student will do work with some data sets that sociologist has access to, and they won't do any kind of collaborative work other than the mentor, the teacher, and the student. But that wasn't the situation in the setting where April got trained. The situation there was that she was not only getting feedback from me, but she was getting feedback from many different people. And she was encouraged to collaborate with other students, to collaborate with other faculty, and to focus on problems, not necessarily on personalities.
Yes.
April, what did you do on your end? When you were in the middle of it, did you get how special it was? Or was this just, okay, day 449 of grad school, gonna do my thing, do. Or did you get it, how special it was when you were in the middle of it?
I think I understood that I was in a really exciting space of research and collaboration at the time. However, in retrospect, I think I'm making more connections and I'm more appreciative of that time than I could have been in that moment, because looking back, we tend to romanticize things, of course, or make connections that we couldn't make back then because of new developments or new experiences. So I knew I was in a special place. And what I think helped me personally was just I was fortunate enough, I was privileged enough to allow my research interests to guide the process. So I was doing work that seemed of utmost importance to me. It mattered to me on a personal level. And I found the topic of close relationships and all of the things that we investigated in the family research group to just be so fascinating, more fascinating than any other subject on this earth. And so I was able to let that kind of drive my work ethic. And also Rand's individual mentorship was very supportive, but he didn't coddle me. He wasn't a micromanager. It wasn't like he was looking over my shoulder and saying, "Did you get those analyses done?" or "How is your master's thesis coming along?" He didn't hold my hand like I know a lot of other mentors do, which is sometimes what the mentees need. But I'm a pretty independent person, and I appreciated the fact that Rand allowed me the freedom to explore my interests without micromanaging me to a point where my interests became stifled or I felt like I was doing the work for someone else. He encouraged me to become an independent thinker and to use my voice even when my voice was quite immature in the beginning and sometimes still is. He allowed me to develop my voice and my interests and the questions that I had in these collaborative meetings where other people, not only him, but other faculty, other grad students, even some undergraduates were pulled into the mix. And so I was able to, like Rand mentioned, just grow up in a family environment where research was at the center. And we quarreled like family sometimes. We really did. And I remember just sitting back and watching my parental figures fight or my siblings go at it. I felt like it was a family environment that I belonged to, which helped me get through the long days or push through the work when it felt impossible to get through. Rand also, he provided me with so many opportunities to meet other people at institutions outside of UC Davis. So we would go to conferences and he'd introduce me to all of his friends that he's developed relationships with over the years. And these are like big name people. So that was helpful. So having a mentor that's well connected goes a long way. But most importantly, I felt like Rand really cared about me and believed in me. And even when he wasn't 100% sure that he should take on a master's student, I always felt like deep down he believed in my potential.
One of my colleagues at UC Davis commented that my graduate students ran my life, that they pretty much guided me through the day. And there was some truth to that. I really felt like they're just going to get thrown in the middle of the storm and deal with it. And in that process, they'll learn how to address interesting research questions and how to interact with other people who either agree or don't agree with them. And again, I go back to Jerry Patterson. When I would go out to Oregon Research Institute and when he and I would talk at times, he always let the data drive the discussion. So even if the data didn't turn out to be what he thought they should be, he was ready to accept that and take the next step in where we wanted to go. And I think we tried to do that. We didn't always do that, but we tried to get there.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for that. I really appreciate just listening to that and just reflecting on that. Rand, there must have been times over your career where you had mentees in your lab that didn't work out so well. What advice would you have given them, or did you try to give them to be successful? Or I guess, you've both been really generous with your time, and so I'm ramping up to ramp down. Looking back, I'll spit it out here. What advice would you give to folks when they have an opportunity to make the most of it? Also thinking back on those occasions, hopefully rare occasions, when people didn't work out so well in your lab, what kind of mistakes did you see them make in retrospect? they probably things they shouldn't have done.
They weren't the only ones who made mistakes. I made
Fair
mistakes
enough. Fair enough.
as well. If I had to advise somebody, I think the primary advice would be that I sometimes didn't take enough time getting to know and understand, or have a potential mentee know and understand where I was coming from in terms of what they wanted and in terms of what I wanted. What kind of person was going to work well with me in the kind of situation that I was trying to create. And if I look at mentees who didn't do so well, it would be because I didn't at the outset communicate with them well enough to be sure that we were both going to be on the same trajectory. And so they were moving in one direction, I was moving in another direction. And that is when things don't work out well. And part of it would be what's required if you're my graduate student, and in terms of what they should understand. And then I should have understood more about what do you want to get out of this, out of your graduate school training, and what are you willing to put into it? And those kinds of discussions are really very worthwhile. And when I failed to do that, then I had some bad experiences.
Well, okay, it's really interesting. You're both cut from the same cloth. It's cute. You'll do almost anything to not criticize somebody else. I'm sitting here thinking those grad students have to do what their mentor tells them to do. That was my training. It wasn't my mentor's job to adjust to me. I had to adjust to my mentor. So Rand, it's really adorable that you think that they had to figure you out. You had to figure them out. They needed to come to you. You're giving them the opportunity.
And to reduce the level of kindness, I had some pretty damn crazy graduate students, and some that proved to be rather stupid, actually. But I should have picked that up before they became part of the fold.
Okay, I appreciate that. And if you decide later you want that edited out, I could edit it out from the beginning of my comment if you'd like.
I would say leave that in there, and they would know who they are.
Well, and odds are they're not listening to this podcast.
They'll never see this podcast.
Right? April, I'm going to ask you the flip side.
Wait a minute. Wait just a minute. Would you agree with that assessment, April?
I would agree with the fact that there was some really horrible fits that just didn't work out. And it wasn't just because, I'm trying to be completely honest here, but I'm not sure it could be one person's fault necessarily. I think it's this miscommunication and just a misalignment of interests and expectations.
That's a romantic relationship researcher there.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about communication and problem solving and commitment, right? In romantic partnerships as well as in the lab. And so if you've got someone coming in who is not willing to communicate, do the work, not willing to listen to other people's ideas for how to solve problems, then you're going to have a meltdown of the relationship. And that's when you see disillusion of the relationship. And sometimes it's good to remove yourself from that relationship, and it's healthier for the family unit to dissolve that relationship. And I certainly saw some relationships go sour while I was a student, and I observed how it went down. And I don't think it's anyone's fault necessarily. It's a dyadic, triadic family unit issue.
Yeah, and I think better communication at the outset before getting into that kind of mentor-mentee relationship could help to eliminate some of those kinds of problems and those outcomes.
I really can't speak your language, but the colloquial way to say it, a little bit more time in dating and courtship before a formal commitment in the lab, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I did have colleagues, good friends actually, who would sometimes criticize me for not taking enough time before I chose to accept a student. And I would say they probably were correct.
Okay. April, looking back now, if you were giving advice to students entering graduate school, which you do actually all the time, I'm sure, give advice to students entering graduate school and telling them to make the most of being a good mentee and to avoid the pitfalls, what would be the couple of highlights you would say, things to do and those things not to do? I think you've already mentioned the big ones.
I would say first and foremost for the student to really be honest with themselves about what they're trying to get out of the training and why they're going into graduate school in the first place. Ideally, right before they've been admitted and entered the graduate school program, they should have some honest conversations with themselves and set their values so that when they go into the program, they can use that as a beacon to guide them through the process. It's really easy to get lost in other people's interests or to get taken down a path that you don't want to get taken down, but you feel pressured for some reason to do. And sometimes as a graduate student, you don't have a lot of power and influence. And so sometimes you do have to go down those paths. Sometimes your mentor wants you to go down this path and you have no choice. But staying true to yourself, even if you have to do that, will make all of the difference because everything's temporary, right? And after graduate school, they can go off and do whatever they want. So remembering that, stay true to yourself as much as you possibly can. Graduate school is a shit ton of work, and staying true to your values and making sure you take care of yourself through the process will only make it so that you can do the work once you're done, right? You can't work if your body and mind are depleted. And then I think even as important as all of that, staying true to yourself, making sure that you're going into a program where there's a good fit with your mentor. I think that there's a lot of luck and kind of randomness to the whole experience. And so you do your best to apply to programs that seem to fit your interests, to ask faculty members that seem to be kind humans, but you never really know until you get there. But if you can make it so you're pretty confident, hopefully 95% confident that this person, this mentor, this faculty member, my RAND, that this person is going to first care about me as a person and second give me opportunities to spread my wings and use my voice and to practice problem solving and research or whatever it is, that this person is going to be my person. That I think is critical because I've seen a lot of aspiring graduate students or students who have been admitted into programs who aren't paired with the right mentor, whether it's a personality clash or whether the mentor has little time to actually do the mentoring, that it can be disastrous, fatal. I've known many people who have just straight up quit graduate school and all of their dreams come crashing down because the fit isn't right. I'm fortunate in that I didn't have the best GRE scores. I was a master's student. I didn't have the fancy PhD level in the beginning, but I was persistent and I sought people out. And maybe it was because I was naive. Maybe there's something to that. Being a little ignorant of the fact that, hey, I'm just a undergrad talking to this bigwig researcher, Rand Conger, but not necessarily, I didn't know necessarily how famous and big he was at the time because I hadn't read all of his work yet. Maybe that helped me have the confidence and the courage to reach out to him and ask him the question, hey, can I work with you? So maybe not being so afraid to ask for things and to reach out to people is also something that I highly recommend for my students now and for any students who are looking to apply to graduate school.
By the way, April, I never did look at your GRE scores.
I'm glad you didn't.
However, you've gone on to write papers for major journals and you're doing advanced statistical modeling. So maybe the GRE scores didn't make that much difference.
I'm not sure if it's supposed, it's a matter of construct validity here. And it's just one measure of one's processing skills, right? So I'm glad that you overlooked or didn't look at my GRE scores and took me on my motivation just in the conversation that you could pick up on. Because if you hadn't, my trajectory would look very different. We wouldn't be talking today. So thank you.
Yeah, you were certainly committed, and that commitment has paid huge dividends for everybody.
There's a phrase, April, that you used that I picked up on that I really am going to paraphrase it slightly. Not everybody gets a rand.
Amen.
Yeah, and some people are better off because of that. However, in April's case, it worked out just fine.
This is a conversation for another day. Academics have to be amongst the worst people on the planet in taking a compliment. I don't know what it is, but academics cannot take a compliment to save their lives. And Rand, you fit right in, sir.
Thank you. It's been a good life, and April was a really great student and doing well at Boise State right now. So that's a reward in its own right.
We are very fortunate to have her every day, and our students and our colleagues and our campus benefits from her. Thank you for everything. And I've taken about an hour, and I don't want to overstay my welcome. I want to thank you both for chatting with me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. It's been fun.